Good afternoon. My name is Sheila O'Moran and my pronouns are she and her. I'm a professor at the School of Music, Theatre and Dance with a joint appointment at the School of Information. I'm a cisgendered woman with short, curly, blonde-ish hair. And my background here behind me is a blue background with the U of M logo. I would like to personally welcome you to this year's conference entitled Towards an Anti-Ableist Academy, Advancing Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at the University of Michigan. The conference runs throughout October and has 11 online sessions, each of which lasts between 60 and 90 minutes. It is a part of our broader contribution to the activities of Disability Community Month. These sessions focus on progress made and work still to be done in closing the accessibility gap for disabled students, staff, and faculty at the U of M. I was a part of the SIDEA board and I participated in subgroups relating to digital accessibility and retention and recruitment. This was an incredible opportunity to meet stakeholders all across campus who are addressing issues of equity and inclusion at the university. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's session entitled Beyond Stairs and Chairs, Making Space More Physically Accessible. Our panelists include Jacqueline Jeffrey, Lead Design Manager and Code Specialist at AEC Architecture and Engineering, Dilip Das, Assistant Vice Provost in the Office of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, Carla Campbell, Research Assistant and Social and Behavioral Sciences at ISR, and Susan Gott, Campus Planner at AES Campus Planning. Jacqueline, I'm going to hand it over to you.
I'd like to welcome everyone here. It was a pleasure to be a part of the SIDEA board and to be able to work with the groups that I was able to work with as well. I worked on the safety and security group and as well as the physical accessibility group for physical assessment on campus. I would like to share with you the items that the SIDEA board recommended. Again, just as a reminder, my name is Jacqueline Jeffrey. I'm a cisgender woman with blonde, long hair, slightly graying at the edges. I have on an aquamarine shirt with white trim, and I have the architecture, engineering, and construction background behind me. I'm going to share my screen to show you the 16 ideas that the physical board came up with for increasing accessibility on campus for people with disability challenges. So the physical accessibility group concentrated on physical access, all the way from transportation to getting inside the building, snow removal, directions, how you get directions to where you need to go, and also looked at the challenges we face when having existing buildings that are older and predate the accessibility codes to new buildings that are being built on campus, and their challenges for making sure they don't create barriers. Our vision for success was a university community that has accessible buildings, right-of-ways, transportation, centralized accessible communication, and amenities that provide a supportive environment for success and independence of disabled students, faculty, and staff, facilitated by a central communication system and support structure for disabled individuals. In summary, the Subcommittee on Physical understands the university does well to provide for individuals with disabilities, but can't do better to remove barriers and provide necessary information for individuals to navigate and participate in campus activities independently. Our recommendations were in no particular priority order. We just have the 16 recommendations were to create a central location for information related to accessibility and accommodations available at the university. Items currently are decentralized and offered buried and difficult to find. This centralization is in process now. Our second recommendation was to create an accessible map for campus showing accessible routes, accessible parking, and building entrances. To update the map when construction or alteration routes are required to communicate what the most effective alternative accessible route to use during construction. This recommendation is also in process and being implemented. The map will be available in November for individuals to use, as well as available for designers through our GIS system to make sure they're coordinating during renovations or new construction. The third recommendation was to provide identification on existing and new buildings as to where the nearest accessible entry is located when an entry is not accessible. We are currently doing a project to research the cost for the signage and to gain exterior element review approval and to determine the quantity of signs that are needed just because of the pure size of our campus. Our fourth recommendation is to increase university paratransit availability, access locations off campus, and summer and evening weekend hours. We've improved the cleanliness and availability by contracting with a new provider, which has been working very well, and we've been getting great feedback. We've also researched possible expansion flexibility options and are exploring ways to provide better services. Our fifth recommendation was for the U of M to integrate accessibility and inclusion as a core guiding principle in the design, development, and evaluation of new technologies and policies. This currently is being researched and is in process of being implemented through the academic branches on the university doing research. Our recommendation number 6 was the university should provide a service that removes temporary barriers from accessible routes, such as spins, bikes, branches, leaves, ice, and snow. This is complete and has both been agreed upon with DPSS, University DPSS, and the City of Ann Arbor Police. It has also been reviewed with grounds for the snow removal and ice, and they have are also centralizing that location for when you need that service to be able to have it on the central link for you to ask for snow removal based on a disability. Item number 7 is to modify the university's building code to require the provision for automatic door operators on exterior entrances and vestibules in all new construction and renovations to existing buildings. This was completed and adopted in 2019 based on the recommendation of this committee and is now a code requirement within the university for any new construction or renovations to an existing lobby to have automatic door operators, which is beyond the minimum code requirements. Our 8th recommendation was to modify the university's building code to require that the ADA turn radius requirements be adopted per the research that showed that the 60-inch turn radius was not adequate for most users. To create a policy for code coordinator to review, research future ADA pending adoptions to the national codes, to review with ECRT to determine if the university should adopt earlier than national code standards are adopted. This was completed and adopted in March of 2020, and we created a process for future review and pending ADA updates. Our recommendation number 9 was to survey existing buildings to determine ADA compliance and identify barriers that may exist, analyze and prioritize to remove the barriers or provide communication accommodations. This is currently just getting started to see if what the funding options would be for a complete university survey, which would be quite extensive. There are many buildings to survey. Recommendation number 10, provide access to accessible and gender inclusive restrooms within 500 feet and traversing no more than one floor, as required currently in the plumbing code for separate sex facilities. We adopted a new code related to gender inclusive multi-stall restrooms on September 15th, 2021 to allow multi-stall gender inclusive bathrooms to still count in the fixture count. There are modifications that are still needed to take a bathroom to be multi-stall gender inclusive. The toilet partitions have to be extended to the ceiling. And there's some renovation that needs to be done, but we can now count that in the fixture count. So it does not have to be extra. Recommendation number 11 was to require construction and maintenance projects to provide an accessible route or communicate alternate routes when the project affects the accessible route. This has been completed and has been implemented with campus planning and with the regions to make sure that they are providing that accessible route information as part of the project. Recommendation number 12 was to assemble a committee to work with ECRT office, the ADA coordinator, on accessible reviews for new construction projects. This is in process with the ECRT department to create the committee for that review. Recommendation number 13 was to educate designers in universal design standards and practices for incorporation in university construction projects. This was completed in October of 2021. All designers on campus, including hospital designers, housing designers, and all designers within AEC and project managers attended the universal design class. Those that were unable to attend are required to complete the class within 6 months, and this recommendation has been considered complete. Recommendation number 14 was to provide a review of new building programs for diversity, equity, and inclusion space considerations. This is in process with AEC and ECRT, sorry. Since the Office of Institutional Equity changed their names, I always stumble on their new abbreviation. So it's the Equity, Civil Rights, and Title IX Office. Recommendation number 15 was parking evaluation for locations, distribution, accessible quantity, accessible access routes, and compliance with ADA requirements for the slope. This is under review with Parking and Transportation, and we were looking forward to advancements in that analysis. Recommendation number 16 was housing accessible options available and communication to increase awareness. This is in process with housing, and they have made significant changes in changing their application process, as well as providing staffing to help students find housing in their contract. And documentation is no longer required for submitting health forms to request accommodation. And they also were currently revising their approval process and their forms to streamline the process to apply for accessible housing. These 16 recommendations were made by the Physical Committee as part of the SIDEA board, and we thank the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for starting this committee, and so that we were able to make these recommendations for advancement and accessibility on our campus. At this time, I'd like to ask if there are any questions related to the SIDEA that have shown up in the chat, Pam?
Welcome, everybody. I'm Dilip Das in the Office of the Provost and Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. I am a biracial man with black hair and graying temples. I'm wearing a blue shirt and have an office background. I'm going to start asking panelists questions, but the first question I'm going to field is one from an attendee who asks, is there a way to report spaces where buttons to open doors are needed or existing buttons are broken? Obviously, we'd like them everywhere, but I'm thinking about some accessible entrances where none of the internal doors are accessible. trapping people in the space and forcing them to find a different route. Jackie, would you like to start with that?
Sure. If you come upon a button that is not functioning appropriately or is moving too fast or too slow for your use, you can report that to the university region office, and they will come out and repair that button through the reporting, or you can report it to the building manager. Those are two ways to get that button fixed. If there's a location where there's not a button and you need a button, you can contact the office of ECRT, which is the Equity, Civil Rights, and Title IX Department, and inform them that you need access to a button, and they can work to get funding to have that button installed.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I mean, an easy way to remember that long title is to think about the ADA coordinator who occupies that office. So if you do a search on ADA coordinator, it'll take you directly to that office and you can report that. Also, Jackie, a question came in. Could you please elaborate on recommendation number 14? If you want to review those slides, there was a question on the detail about number 14.
Number 14 is to provide review of new building programs for diversity, equity, and inclusion space considerations. And this is in process with the review and the designers to make sure we're providing programs such as personal rooms and gender inclusive restrooms, gender inclusive locker rooms, gender inclusive access to facilities that may be based on separate sex basis, to make sure there's also gender inclusive included. And these are all being worked through in various ways. One is by adding them to our design guidelines. So they are parameters that must be followed on all new construction and major renovations, as well as making sure that all of the designers are informed of the importance of these spaces and these types of spaces for people with disabilities.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And then too quickly, and then I'm going to start a question with our university planner, Susan Gott. But first, I wanted to ask you about two questions that came in. Where can we find the accessibility map once it's available? Where is there an accessibility map?
So the accessibility map is currently in our GIS program, which we are going to make available to departments to display on their maps when they put up maps on their communication boards. It will also be available printed out at the Michigan Union and Michigan League information offices, as well as we're hoping to get it available electronically. There's a way when you go into Google Maps that you can map driving something and you can map walking something. We are talking with them about asking them to add, what if you were disabled in a wheelchair or needed to know the accessible route? Will they add the accessible map, and we'll provide them the data information, but that's in progress right now.
Thank you, Jacqueline. We're going to switch over to some prepared questions for the panelists. And I will ask Susan Gott, the university planner, the first question. Where do you see advances in accessibility on campus?
Thanks so much. My name again is Susan Gott, and I'm the campus planner. I'm here with glasses. I'm a light-skinned woman. I have dark shoulder-length hair. I appear to have a little glow from the backlighting. I'm using a background today that is the architecture, engineering, and construction background with a block yellow M. And thank you for the question, Dilip. You know, we really have seen advances at several scales. At a very large scale, we think about accessibility with a number of large capital projects and really integrate into our master planning how as individual buildings are built, we can strengthen accessibility and connectivity. So a good example of that was the early planning for the Museum of Art and the new crosswalk working with the city of Ann Arbor that then connects between the Michigan Union and LS&A, which extends back to Munger, and planning for all those crosswalks. So you can see in this image, thanks for sharing this, the new crosswalk that was recently added on State Street. And then as Jackie mentioned, one of our recommendations has been to review ADA parking on campus. And here is a recent shift working with the city of Ann Arbor and the Downtown Development Authority. We understood the need for additional patron parking and were able to just recently convert these 2 new parking spaces on State Street for accessible parking. We also work on a number of capital projects to ensure adequate accessibility into the buildings. And I think you might have a photograph of the recently completed Biological Sciences building. And we actually designed multiple entrances for optimal access into the building. This is a photograph from the southeast upper grade entering in at the Museum of Natural History, where the pumas flank and help identify that entrance, particularly if you're coming from the south, say the Central Campus Transit Center. We also have with this building a lower level entrance for individuals that may be coming by one type of transit service or another, who can then enter the building and come up to the upper level. And then finally, we think about the culture of campus and the opportunities to ensure that various amenities on campus are also accessible. And a good example that turned out quite well, I think, on Wall Street a few years ago is a new historic set of informational displays that were all designed at that parking structure. It's the East. We have 2 different parking structures on Wall Street. This one was also done in collaboration with the Ann Arbor Historic Community members. And each of these displays are accessible for all individuals to enjoy.
Thank you, Susan. A couple more questions have come in. Are there examples of buildings on campus that would need to be torn down and rebuilt in order to make them accessible?
This is Jacqueline Jeffrey. I guess I'll field that question. There are ways to make buildings accessible without having to tear them down. The university takes great pride in our buildings and our campus environment. And if a building does need to be torn down, there are usually more extensive reasons for it to be torn down than the fact that it can't be made accessible. We try and make all programs accessible or provide accommodations to programs. So I'm not aware of any building on campus at this time that would need to be torn down to be made accessible.
And then we have a recommendation that we post the accessibility maps online and maybe through the Campus Information Center, which currently has a navigation map available. So that's an excellent suggestion that we can take to the table and figure out. Our next question is, this is for all panelists. Let's start with Carla. What are the challenges we continue to face with physical accessibility on campus?
Thank you, Dilip. My name is Carla Campbell. I'm a white female with brown hair pulled back into a ponytail and silver glasses. My pronouns are she, her. I have been a research data processor with the university for 19 years, and I identify as a person with mobility and visual perception disorders. Behind me is a plain blue U of M branded background. I'm part of an Institute for Social Research Accessibility Committee that reports to the center and DE&I directors. And so with that big mouthful, I will answer the question and say that I have an example of something I noticed a while back, where you're asking about challenges to physical accessibility on campus. And just so one day I noticed that if a person in a wheelchair parks above the first floor in the Thompson Street Blue Lot, they will soon discover that there are no door openers above ground level. So you can drive in and park, but if you park above the first floor, you'd have to struggle with opening a heavy door towards you in order to access the elevators. Old historic buildings, buildings on hills or with stairs or heavy doors, these are always going to pose a challenge. I believe that physical accessibility also includes the handling of air quality. Living in the middle of a global pandemic has made this more of a workplace safety concern than it ever was before. In order to continue moving forward, we have to keep this safe space for dialogue open. All I had to do to get here was attend a public meeting and raise my hand.
Thank you, Carla. Jackie, would you like to address physical challenges still that are on your plate?
Well, we work yearly with the Facility Condition Assessment Program to analyze the anywhere that barriers are reported or that where accessibility needs occur. Occasionally with exterior ramps or exterior sidewalks in our environment in Michigan, the sidewalks may heave or the ramp may alter. And so we have a priority program with the funding we're provided to make sure we're maintaining accessible entries so that there's always at least one accessible entry to the building so people can get in with existing buildings. New buildings, 60% of the entries are required to be accessible. So if we do have a winter event, we still have plenty of entries that we can direct people to, since 60% are required to be accessible in new construction.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And I have a question which I think vexes many of us on campus. And anyone is on the panel is free to answer this. Jacqueline, Sue, Carla, how are we dealing with the influx of scooters? They are often hazards for people with many mobility challenges and can present dangers and have presented injury to individuals, not only on campus, but wherever they're found.
This is Jacqueline Jeffrey. I can answer the work that I've been doing with DPSS and the city of Ann Arbor as it relates to understanding scooters and bikes on campus. If they're blocking stairs or ramps, they need to be removed or relocated. We're also trying to create campus education, that when they do some of their educations on campus with students, that they inform them to, if you see a scooter or if you're using a scooter, not to leave it in the way that it blocks a sidewalk, and to be more conscious with that. Also, we've been working with them to, if someone anchors their bike to a ramp or a stair, to understand that people need to use the handrails on different sides. So even if one handrail is available, it may be on the correct side for the person to use for their disability, so that a bike blocking a stair or a ramp is an obstruction and needs to be immediately removed. And so they've been working on making that a policy within their departments. I'm going to turn this over to Sue Gott, as I know she knows a little bit more about collaborating with the companies that are providing these mobile transit units on campus.
Thanks, Jackie. You actually covered much of what I was going to say in terms of enforcement, but I would just add that we've also worked on speed and made sure that they are not functional in areas of highest pedestrian and people density, so that we're mindful of where they operate and where they don't operate. Finally, I would just say that if we see continuous challenges in certain locations, it's very helpful to know that, so that we can understand if we have users in particular areas where education needs to be increased, parking needs to be reviewed, or we need to work with a company or the enforcement. So I think it's helpful feedback for us to receive.
Thank you both. And another comment suggests that bus stops are a key dumping place for scooters, which makes it a mobility hazard and blockage to get to the actual buses. So another potential solution is monitoring bus stops as well, which tend to collect a natural dumping place for scooters. We'll move on to a next panel question. Again, for Sue, what challenges do you face related to ADA and having an existing campus that are having on an existing campus and landscape? Could you address ADA as it refers to some of the challenges that you as university planner are confronted with?
Sure. Well, most recently, we have been faced with the challenge of all the outdoor temporary canopies, both last summer and this summer. And those created new challenges that we haven't had in the past because of the pandemic. And as a result, making sure that those venues are accessible and have the associated seating, which are also accessible, well signed, that each of them are in locations that are optimal. We also have received our highest amount of requests for outdoor seating on campus than we have ever had before. And while it's exciting to see new vibrancy outside by additional seating, it comes with great complexity to plan and locate these in a responsible way. And so you'll probably see across campus new seating and opportunities for new access. And we're just trying to keep up with that demand. Obviously, ongoing and big picture is just working with existing landforms, different grades in the existing built environment. And so we use all of our ongoing projects, whether it's a maintenance project, a renovation project, new construction, to look to see where we can make improvements over today's built conditions.
Thanks, Sue. I'm going to intercede here with another participant question regarding a question who said, I used to work in the emergency department and had a short-term mobility issue. However, I had a handicap pass, but it was still 0.25 miles away from the entrance. There were no other closer options, and the walk itself was painful. What might the hospital be doing to increase accessibility for not only patients, but staff?
This is Jacqueline Jeffrey. I can't speak specifically for the hospital, but I do know that the university has a program through Parking and Transportation that you can request a pass that's closer and a spot that's designated if you have a disability that requires that use. There is an application process through Parking and Transportation that I do know covers campus as well as the hospital. But I can't speak to the hospital policy on where they put theirs, since I predominantly work for the campus. Sue, I don't know if you have any additional information to add to that.
I don't, but again, certainly I think we could connect the right people to try to have a follow-up conversation if someone would like to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions, and I will continue to address them. I'm going to turn back to the panelists and ask Carla, you've been at ISR for 19 years. What changes have you seen at ISR and how did they come about?
Well, thanks, Dilip. ISR has a general accessibility subcommittee, as well as one specific to technology. Both of these groups report to the DE&I director in addition to the director of the Institute. Literally anyone can join. It was purely by going through the motions of organizing that they discovered there were no accessible restrooms anywhere on the ground floor. They quickly worked to fix the problem. One of the ongoing challenges faced by our tech accessibility subcommittee has been working with Deltek on their timekeeping software. Sadly, the saga continues on that.
Thank you, Carla. I'm going to address an audience question for people with fatigue issues. Like many students with long COVID, it would be helpful to be able to locate benches and resting points along campus paths. Is any of this information available? I suspect it would also be helpful for donor visits and some faculty emeritus.
This is Jacqueline and Jeffrey again. Dilip, I was just in the process of typing on that one as well. Adding benches and outdoor seating currently is not shown on our maps as an asset that I'm aware of, but it's something that we could look into as we develop the map and the map goes forward to showing where benches and tables are located. Sue, do you happen to know if there's a map for seating?
No, it certainly could be developed. Again, it's a fairly dynamic process. They get removed, they get added. So we have not attempted to provide that as a campus resource. It certainly would be possible.
For those of you who out there who are asking questions and we don't have complete answers, I encourage you to follow up with us. I'm happy to put my email in the chat and act as the intermediary for questions that I can route to find out answers to. So I'll put my email in the chat, and if you would like to follow up with me, I can pursue the answers to the questions that are not readily available here. Carla, you have a question, I believe, as well. Would you like to ask that question? I think that's for Jacqueline, or would you like me to ask that?
Let me just, which number was it?
Okay, I can run with it.
Okay, thank you.
Jacqueline, there are so many spaces that are not accessible on accessible routes. Could you speak a little bit to this in terms of built environment challenges?
There are some things that are permitted during with ADA that allow you to provide accommodations. So there may be spaces on campus that aren't accessible, but we try and make sure that the programs are all accessible and provided in an accessible area. And if that can also be reported through the ECRT for us to make sure we're making the accommodations, or that we can determine how to make that space accessible if there are barriers that are found.
Thank you. I'm going to do a combined question from the audience and one for our panel. It has to do with being proactive rather than reactive to accessibility needs. And I'm wondering, Carla, specifically within the Institute for Social Research, where have you seen a sense of proactivity occurring or arising within ISR? What have you seen changing related to accessibility at ISR?
Thanks again, Dilip. I feel that the university's attitude regarding accessibility has become much more open and proactive as it has organized over time. Creating a structure through which anyone can positively engage has brought us not just a better ability to listen, but also the tools and connections needed to act and follow through. The more folks we can get to engage and contribute, the better and more thoughtful the long-term outcome. I appreciate that ISR prompts us to report our DE&I contributions on our yearly self-evaluations. This makes workplace volunteer work, like checking for accessibility compliance, an elective part of everyone's job. Thanks again.
Thanks, Carl. Many of the recommendations that Jacqueline reviewed are about, in fact, proactively or foregrounding questions about accessibility within the process of building, grounds, and what have you. So in other words, we're looking through an accessibility lens before we start projects. Jacqueline or Susan, would you like to comment on that question of how things may have changed to foreground accessibility lens?
Just a real quick example that comes to mind. Jackie mentioned the trouble we have with bikes or scooters being attached to railings or on ramps. And so an example of something proactive is we do try to not only have an annual removal practice on our bike racks, but we go out sooner if our bike racks are overflowing. It means we need to really bring more resources for bike parking, so that instead of just thinking about the enforcement side, we actually go back and say, we need to increase capacity for bike parking to give those cyclists a place to locate their bikes as an incentive not to park where we don't want them to park. Just one quick example.
Thank you. I want to address another audience question. Will you be addressing how to request accommodations in this session or in another one? I'm wondering about students and faculty, but also for people not affiliated with the university, such as guest speakers and the like. And to that question, thank you for that question. Yes, we will be addressing requesting accommodations on October 27th from 3 to 4 p.m. You can register for that online, and I'll just drop the registration for that program and all of the programs in the chat here. So that will be led by our ADA coordinator, Christina Klein, who will be addressing that. So I encourage you to register for that program coming up on the 27th. Another question that has come up is a general observation. Restrooms are often special challenge for those with mobility, stability issues. For example, the accessible stall is furthest from the door. The sink soap dryers are not co-located, requiring additional movement to get between each. So it sounds to me like a recommendation to re-examine the location of accessible stalls and clean up in the sinks area. Any comment on that particular one?
Definitely something that my office can look into. We have just established standards for toilet paper dispensers to make sure that in the accessible stall going forward, whenever toilet paper dispensers are replaced or put in, that there are two kinds to make sure that that is accessible as possible. There's the one above the grab bar and one below the grab bar to give everybody more equal access to toilet paper dispensers. You'll see that in all new buildings going forward, as well as renovations or when replacements take place. The soap dispensers and sink locations I can look into with our office to see if we can develop a standard to add to the design guideline to make sure they're co-located.
Thank you, Jackie. or sort of a wrap-up question as we field more audience questions is, what vision for all of you would you see for the future as it relates to physical accessibility? Carla, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Accessibility compliance can be hard, time-consuming, costly, and sometimes thankless work. There will always be busy seasons, finals weeks, rush jobs, and budget cuts. But folks needing accommodation are put in a vulnerable place, having to always be expected to ask first. My vision is that I'd like for us to continue to build and support more organizational doing of things so that those in need of the accommodation will have to do a lot less asking. Thank you.
Jacqueline, Sue, visions for the future and regarding physical accessibility?
I'd like to second Carla's statement, because I think it is really important. We all have so much to do, and we want to be successful on campus and in our studies, in our teaching, in our research. And it would be nice that, you know, eventually there's a time where we don't have to ask for accommodations because the environment is accessible enough to accept us all. But as we face an existing environment, we face the challenges of making that happen. But that would be the future vision that I would like to see as well.
Agreed.
Thank you. I'm going to field a couple more questions. One, the ever-present problem of parking, but particularly accessible parking. Is there a plan to review accessible parking on campus and see if it needs to be adjusted?
Jackie, do you want to take that one from the recommendations that are under review right now about that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I was struggling to get my unmute button. This is Jacqueline Jeffrey again. And with parking and transportation, we are working on determining where we can add more accessible spaces. As Sue also said, there was some I just recently added to State Street. We're also working on, with the accessible map, we will be showing the accessible parking locations on the map as well. And the accessible route from that accessible parking to the buildings will be shown on the map if there's one available. So that will be shown, which will show the locations of accessible parking. Some may need, you may need a special pass, a blue pass or other pass to get to that parking. So that needs to be understood as well. But that will be part of the map process to show that. And then parking and transportation is looking at evaluating if the sufficient numbers are provided in each parking location as we go forward to make sure that that is providing the maximum number of accessible spaces in each new parking structure and parking lot as we go forward.
Thank you. A question came in about whether these events, including this one, will be recorded, and they will be posted within 2 weeks on the same site that registration is. So I've just posted that site so that anyone can go there and review this webinar. It will be recorded. Here's another question that's come in. I'm a student from another university who works on improving accessibility on campus. Is there any way I can access your design guidelines?
The design guidelines for the University of Michigan are published on the Architecture, Engineering, Construction website. If you go to the Architectural Engineering Construction website, it says 4 vendors, and you click on that and it shows the design guidelines.
Thank you. Will the Regents ever resume meeting close to the Central or North Campus? Currently, they meet at the golf course, which is difficult to reach without independent transportation, which most students do not have access to.
The Regents will be meeting at the new Ruthven renovation when it opens. Sue, is Ruthven in the classroom edition going to change its name, or is it still Ruthven when the Regents go back there?
Yes, it's the Ruthven building and also the new Central Campus classroom building when that opens.
Thank you. Last question. So many people with disabilities have noted that having a disabled parking permit is like obtaining a hunting license, but the availability is so inadequate, people often are unable to find parking. I've seen events where the invited speaker had to cancel because they couldn't find a place to park. An ongoing question, any comments on that one?
It's a tough one. It's a real tough one. And it's one that I think probably goes into our current challenges and maybe one that can inspire us to look for programs to try to improve. You know, I know there are shuttles and some special accommodations that are made for certain events. And if those accommodations haven't been adequate, then that might be some additional feedback that can be used for our event planners.
Thank you, Sue. And we're about to wrap up. I just wanted to encourage you to register for tomorrow's event at noon. It's a double event. One is focusing on, for graduating students, what do employers provide and look for, and how accessible are those employers' recruitment options. So the Center for University Career Planning is going to be presenting for the first hour on what kinds of changes and accessibility opportunities are available for employers as they seek University of Michigan graduates, and what can University of Michigan graduates expect when they go into the workplace regarding accessibility. The second part will be about how University of Michigan units are integrating accessibility recruitment materials into their recruitment and admissions processes. So in other words, how are University of Michigan recruitment operations reaching out to disabled prospective students out there? So that'll be the second one from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. I encourage you to register for that. It's at the same website as before. Thank you very much for your time. And I really wanted to thank the panelists here, the ASL interpreters, the captions provider, and thank you all for tuning in this time. Again, it will be recorded for future. Thanks a lot.